going to look at our Eastern Woodlands reading. So if you haven't already done so, you can click on this link if you would like. If you don't even want to pull the reading up for this part, you could even just follow along with this video, but you will need the reading open when you do the activity on the next page. So I would suggest go ahead and clicking it and opening it. I've already got it right here. So we're going to talk about the Eastern Woodlands today. You've already seen some videos and have a little bit of background on this group. They may have just called them the Iroquois. The Iroquois was one group, or one subgroup, I guess. And if you look up here at the map, the Eastern Woodlands people lived in the northeast region of the United States, as well as part of Canada. So here's Lake Michigan. So Indiana would have been in this area as well. So some of these groups would have lived where we live now. So I'm going to read through this and stop every once in a while to just kind of point out some things, and then you'll be able to use this information on the practice page on the next page. There were many tribes within the northeastern region. The tribes were grouped according to their language: Iroquoian, Algonquin, and Siouan. The most powerful of the Indians was the Iroquois League of Nations. 5 nations, the Cayuga, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, and the Seneca, came together to form a powerful league of Native Americans who spoke the same language, believed in the same gods, and had similar customs, and considered cooperation to be an important quality of everyday life. So there were these 5 different groups. So within the Eastern Woodlands, there were all these groups, but there were 5 groups specifically that decided to come together and form this league, this group, because they had a lot of similarities. They spoke the same language, had similar customs, those kinds of things. So within this league, there was a great council formed to represent each nation as a central government. So this was like their form of government. So within each of these 5 groups, they would send people that would represent the entire tribe. And their primary purpose was to keep the great law of peace. And that was where the Iroquois should not kill each other. So essentially to keep the peace between these 5 groups, they sent a bunch of representatives to come together, and they also made an important decisions and laws that they took back to the tribes and villages. The Native Americans in the Eastern Woodlands had many resources for survival. They had fertile soils to grow crops. They had rivers and lakes and coastal waters to keep themselves and the animals they hunted hydrated and healthy. They had forests for animals to live. They also had a moderate amount of rainfall to help keep the crops flourished. So with this area rich in natural resources, the Native Americans were able to be hunters, gatherers, fishermen, and farmers. So essentially, the land provided all kinds of good things for them. They had good soil so that they could be farmers, and that good soil also provided things that grew on their own, so they were able to be gatherers. Because they had the rivers and lakes and the coastal waters, they were able to fish, but that also helped keep animals alive. So they were able to hunt. They had forests that the animals were able to live in. So they had all kinds of options as far as food went. They had a wide variety of animals to hunt. Animals roamed and built their homes and habitats throughout the Eastern Woodlands. They often migrated into the forests and by streams. Some common animals hunted in these forests were bear, deer, raccoons, rabbit, and elk. Beaver and numerous kinds of fish swam in the nearby waters. The Eastern Woodlands people would travel by foot and canoes made out of birch bark and tree gum while hunting and fishing. And we talked about kayaks in the last group with the Inuit. Canoes were a little bit bigger. They would hold several people, but they had those because they had all of the lakes and the rivers and the streams, so that was one way that they traveled. And they were also known for praying for the animals that they killed. So they understood that the animals that were in this area they were grateful for the fact that they had those animals to hunt and they were able to eat. Then they also understood that the animals were sacrificing themselves for them to be able to eat. So they prayed and thanked those animals for providing that food. These Native Americans were able to gather foods grown in the wild and farm their own foods. So there was an abundance of different kinds of berries that they were able to gather. Shellfish was gathered in the waters. They also grew things like corn, beans, squash, and pumpkins. There was lots of food available in this region. They definitely didn't hurt for food. Since the Eastern Woodlands people did not have to go far for food, their homes were sturdy and made for permanent residence, which makes sense. They didn't have to travel after animals. They didn't have to travel to gather food, so they made their homes sturdy. They made them durable. They made them so that they would last. Most of them lived in long, rectangular buildings called longhouses. They were made of tree and bark, and several families lived in one longhouse. In the video that you watched earlier, you would have seen an example of a longhouse. They were huge, and they were actually owned by the women of the tribe. Others lived in smaller homes called wigwams. They had wooden frames and were covered by woven mats and sheets of birch bark to form a dome. So wigwams also held several families, just not as many as the longhouses. They would have been smaller homes. Like all native tribes, the Eastern Woodland people had many beliefs and customs. They wore masks to scare evil spirits out of a sick person. When someone in the tribe died, they held a cry ceremony that lasted for 5 days. Face painting was worn for special occasions, war, and to express feelings. So different colors meant different things. So for example, black meant death or grief. So at a cry ceremony, you might see people using black face paint. Purple was royalty or special events. So maybe if they had special things for the chief of the tribe, or maybe they had a wedding, they might use purple. And red meant life. So maybe there was a new baby born, and they would use red face paint so that it kind of expressed some of their feelings. Wampum belts, which you're going to find, you're going to look those up in the poplet that you're going to do here in a little bit, were made from stringing shells together and used during ceremonies. And those are really cool. I'm excited for you to look at those pictures. Even though the Eastern Woodlands people practiced their peace law within their nation, they were skilled at war with other tribes and the Europeans. So people that were outside of the Eastern Woodlands tribes, or some of the explorers or the settlers that were coming over, they were able to defend themselves. They used the tomahawk and bow and arrow. If we go up back towards the top, here's a picture of a tomahawk. So something kind of like a hatchet or an axe that they would have made. They were known for performing scalp dances when celebrating victories. The Mohawk Nation is actually where the Mohawk hairstyle originated, but this was kind of a sign of taunting their enemies or a sign of strength, and they actually would pull or pluck the hair out to make the Mohawk style, not shaving it like we would do today. So that would take a very tough person to be able to do that, because I've had hair pulled before, and man, it does not feel good. So there's all kinds of other things to learn. Like I said, you've probably learned things from the videos earlier, but now what you're going to do is you're going to go on to the next page, and you're going to do some fill-in-the-blank questions. So go ahead, do it to it.